To safely move the floor jack carton, always use a dolly with a rated capacity greater than the package. An appropriate material handling dolly will aid in the prevention of lower back strains and lifting concerns. Always enlist a second person to lift loads over 50 pounds. Use a knife or side cutter to safely cut the straps. Then lift the lid off the base. Next, fold down the flap at the rear of the jack and remove the end cap. Then roll the jack out of the carton. Next, press down on the yoke and remove the yoke clip. Then install the handle, making sure it's completely seated prior to use. Finally, bleed the jack by loosening the handle 2 complete turns counterclockwise from fully closed, and pump the handle without a load, 10 to 15 pump strokes. Close the handle and verify the trapped air is purged by observing the lift arm in 1 full pump. If properly bled, the lift arm will raise a minimum of 6 inches. When raising a vehicle, place automatic transmissions in park. Leave manual transmissions in first gear. Apply the emergency brake. Make sure to check the vehicle's owner's manual or consult with the ALI Vehicle Lifting Points Guide to determine the proper lift point to position the jack. Maneuver the jack so its saddle is centered directly below the vehicle's designated lift point. Rotate the handle clockwise until it stops. Pump the handle slowly. Pump the handle until the load is completely raised and place jack stands at the vehicle's designated support points. To lower the vehicle, place the jack saddle under the vehicle lift point and slowly pump the jack until the vehicle is raised above the jack stands. Then remove them. Do not crawl under the vehicle when placing or removing jack stands. Slowly rotate the jack handle counterclockwise to lower the vehicle. Finally, remove the jack. In the event your jack is not functioning properly, or to inquire on a warranty issue, or if you need replacement parts, call 877-762-7664 in the U.S. or 866-824-0524 in Canada. The operator will assist you in obtaining replacement parts. Your Snap-on floor jack is field serviceable, and each of the components are designed to be easily replaced if necessary. To repair or replace the power unit, first remove the rear crossbar with a 14mm socket. Install the optional pump piston retention strap to facilitate easy removal of the power unit. The pump piston retention strap keeps the pistons from extending during disassembly, preventing potential hydraulic fluid leaks. To gain access to the 4 bolts that hold the power unit in place, you can remove the rear casters using a 24mm socket. As an alternative, you can use a 19mm swivel socket to remove the power unit fasteners. This saves the step of removing the rear casters and is the method we've used in this demonstration. Remove the 4 bolts holding the power unit in place. Pull up on the lift arm to swing the power unit out from the bottom of the jack. Once accessible, remove the 2 retaining rings on the trunnion block with a snap-on retaining ring plier. Spread the parallel links apart to remove the pump. Then, remove the 2 springs from the pump assembly with a needle nose plier. Now, remove the trunnion block by taking out the cotter pin and sliding the trunnion block off the ram. Place the trunnion block onto the replacement power unit. Insert the cotter pin and spread the ends to ensure the pin stays in place. Then reinstall the springs. Now, place the trunnion block into the holes in the parallel links. Install the retaining rings on each side and swing the power unit into place. Carefully start the bolts and torque each of them to 35 foot-pounds. If the casters were removed, reinstall them and torque them to 45 foot-pounds. Next, remove the piston retaining strap with a 4 mm hex bit socket. Reinstall the crossbar and torque those bolts to 180 inch-pounds. Test the operation of the jack by first loosening up the handle 2 full turns and pumping 10 full strokes to bleed out any trapped air. Close the release valve and test the jack by pumping the handle and observing the action of the lift arm. If the lift arm appears to rise equally with each pump stroke, the jack is ready for use. To service or replace the yoke, first remove the handle. The optional pump piston retaining strap can be installed at this time to keep the pump pistons in place. Then, remove the 2 yoke pivot bolts using a 26 mm socket. The bolt on the right side of the jack has a left-handed thread and requires clockwise rotation to loosen it. Be sure to take note of the proper thread orientation of each pivot bolt when replacing them. Next, remove the yoke. For reinstallation, place the yoke into position. Start each of the yoke pivot bolts by hand to ensure they're not cross-threaded in assembly. Tighten each of the yoke pivot bolts to 52 foot-pounds. The pump piston retention strap can now be removed. Lubricate both of the grease fittings with lithium-based grease. Finally, check the operation of the jack prior to placing it back in service. First, you'll need to remove the yoke when repairing or replacing the universal joint. Use a 4 mm hex bit socket to remove the universal joint retaining plate. Next, unscrew the universal joint completely and remove it. Prior to installing the new universal joint, lubricate the O-ring with some oil to prevent any damage to the seal during installation. Next, take the new universal joint and completely thread it into the power unit. Replace the universal joint retaining plate and torque the fastener to 133 inch-pounds. The yoke can now be installed. Test the operation of the jack prior to placing it back in service. In order to replace the yoke roller and pin, first remove the yoke. Then use the SRPC 4700 snap ring pliers to remove the retaining ring. Finally, push out the pin. Prior to reassembly, lubricate the yoke roller, pin, and pivot with a lithium-based grease. Place the new yoke roller and pin into the yoke and reinstall the retaining ring. Test the operation of the jack prior to placing it back in service. When replacing a front wheel, use a 24 mm socket to remove the nut holding the front wheel. Replace the wheel and be sure to use the new replacement nut supplied in the kit. Torque the nut to 45 foot-pounds. lubricate the grease fitting with lithium-based grease. You can remove the casters with a 24mm socket. Reinstall and torque the nut to 45 foot-pounds. To remove the saddle, simply turn it with a slight upward force. When the notch clears the lift arm pivot, the saddle can be removed. Installation is the opposite of removal. Be sure to inspect the mating surfaces and apply a lithium-based grease if needed. It's recommended that your snap-on floor jack be lubricated weekly or as conditions require. There are 5 grease fittings on the floor jack. 1 is on the lift arm pivot. There are 2 in the yoke, and 1 for each front wheel. Dispense just enough grease to fill the area between the mating surfaces, but not too much, as excess grease can catch dirt and debris. It's also a good idea to apply grease where the handle meets the yoke and the saddle pivot. Apply enough grease to cover the mating surfaces. Also use a spray lithium-based grease on linkages and pivot points. Usage and shop conditions determine frequency of regular maintenance. Always keep the jack clean and dry. Inspect the jack before each workday. Do not use the jack if any component is cracked, broken, bent, shows signs of damage, is missing parts, or is leaking any hydraulic fluid. If it shows damage, immediately remove it from service until properly repaired. Also, regularly check your jack for missing hardware or components. Take corrective action before using. Thank you for watching. With proper maintenance, your Snap-on FJ200 floor jack is designed to provide years of reliable service.